in the course of our conversation, that is, we can make it a conversation, stop me if you need to make a point or want to ask a question. I think in this part, I'd like to begin kind of with my conclusion, which is that reviewing what you're doing every year is really essential. That the end of your academic calendar should end with a retreat for campus ministers in such a way that you not only are liberated in a sense where you can enjoy a meal with each other and have some fun activities with each other, but that you're looking at the different parts of the year honestly. You're looking at the retreats honestly, that you're looking at your colleagues who are working the retreats honestly, that you're looking at the behavior of the students honestly. Because if you're not, then you just get into a routine where you start with kind of cookie cutter retreats, where you just start stamping out the same things, hoping the same thing will happen year after year. And then if you do run into a problem, what are you going to do? You have to understand the nature of the retreat so well that in the middle of it you can stop and do something different. One time in the course of, this was a Kairos retreat, and I'd been doing these for, I don't know, 10, 15 years. A particular class was not in the space that particular classes typically are at certain points. So you know when you get to the point in the Kairos retreat where those Palanca letters are read, and you can see kind of what's happening in the students. Well, if that's not happening, not only should you notice it, but that is, if their hearts are not being lifted, right? But if the other group leaders are saying, what's going on? I had one year where the seniors who were running the retreat were in a panic because the juniors on the retreat didn't seem to be getting it. There was something going on. So, you know, in the exercise that follows the reading of the letters, where you get the large group together and you talk about things. So, though typically the faculty and the other retreat leaders will stay, I had said I'd like to talk to these students, so I sent everybody else out of the room. And I said, I know there's something else going on here, and I don't know what it is. But if I'm going to help you with this retreat, and if you truly want from the retreat what you've heard other people's experience, you're not going to be able to do that until we get past whatever it is that's going on. And I came up with a way of talking about it. They started pouring their hearts out about some incident that had happened a year and a half earlier that nobody had addressed among them as a class, and it had just been growing and growing and growing. And so the real heart of the retreat for them together was getting past that obnoxious bit of behavior that had been stymieing their own unity as a class for a year and a half. And when they got back, the seniors still weren't sure that they had done the Kairos retreat, but they themselves had had a wonderful experience in terms of being open with each other. So being able to, at the end of a year, review something like that and be prepared for it, you know? Anything can happen during a retreat, and you want to be ready for it. You know, one year I was getting some feeling from some faculty that they didn't want to go on the retreat this year, and I was like, well, why? Well, I don't know. And yeah, I heard all sorts of excuses. There's something else wrong. So I went to some of the younger faculty members and I said, are you hearing something that I'm not hearing? Yes, they said that one of the teachers was talking about potential use of drugs on the retreat. Now I'd been working for years and years to get rid of cigarette smoking on retreat. It took a long, long time, but we finally did. So there was this rumor going around, which I wasn't aware of because nobody tells Father, right? There was this rumor going around that certain persons were breaking out the stuff to smoke. And so I thought, well, how can we deal with this? And the administrators were very edgy. You know, the dean is saying, should I come up and patrol? And I'm like, no, I don't think that's going to help. So we invented a new role for the retreat called the Good Shepherd. And the Good Shepherd came from 11 at night to 5 in the morning. And all the Good Shepherd did was walk around. That was his only job. His only job was to walk around, get the kids in the houses, and make sure they went to bed, turn out the lights, and so forth. Because the other faculty, by that point, were just too doggone tired. And you needed them awake. So they've got a Good Shepherd in their retreats now. And it's, you know, we laugh a little bit about it on the faculty. But these are the sort of things which you kind of have to review what's going on and say, if it's necessary for us to do something, then we have to say, well, what is it necessary to do? What shall we do? But you can't figure that out if you never take a break for yourselves and debrief or talk about these things. I want to show you two things that we do that have helped us over the course of you. Now, again, the first part, the end of year evaluation. This is based on the Ignatian tradition, on a prayer called the Examen. But from the LaSalle's traditions, you can find things that work the same way. So here's one thing we do at the end of the year. First, preparing individually, and then talking together one-on-one. The director of retreats talking with whoever is helping, and then talking in groups about it. What are you thankful for? What is going on in your own spirits in terms of your own relationship with God? Where have you seen that God has been active, and where have you needed some help? Where do you have a sense of wonder in your year? Where are you confused or frustrated during the course of the year? Where do you hope to be better? All right? You can apply that to yourself. You can apply it to the retreat as well. At the beginning and the end of every year, I also was in the habit of preparing a report that let the Board of Trustees know exactly what it was that was going on. This is kind of curriculum as a product, right? So it's not the sort of thing that you're talking about on retreats, but it's the sort of thing that you've got to think about. There are a certain number of things that you have to do. You have to know how many retreats you're trying to do during the course of the year, how many students you're dealing with, what it's going to cost, and so forth. You have to be able to talk about that because it's part of the context that has an impact on how you go about preparing for other things. So I offer this to you as kind of a way of looking at your retreats and your liturgies and your service programs and saying it's not just a matter of getting the students on board. This is part of making sure that your trustees are on board, that your administrators are on board, and that the teachers who talk about these things are also on board. So you want to make sure that at the end of the year you have some kind of a review, all right, in however you can work that in the context of the LaSalle schools. The second thing I'll mention before we get to the particular freshman and sophomore retreats is for those who see that things have to be completely uniform every year, year after year, that's going to be a problem for you. If things have to remain static, that's going to be a problem. Second is that if you're not aware of the context of what's going on in the school in a particular year, that's going to be a problem. Third, if you're not getting enough variety of participation among your faculty and administrators, or if it's the same people all the time, that's going to be a problem. If certain people refuse to take part, that's going to be a problem. So the context of who our colleagues are has to be addressed, and they have to be won over, right, in a positive way. You can mandate that everyone must do this, but that's not going to win their hearts, right? You have to try and figure out what it is, because you want quality people working on these things. You want to figure out how that feeds into what you're trying to do. And then finally, this idea again of phronesis, the lived experience of the students. If they can't explicitly talk about what their experience has been by the time the retreat is over, that's a problem, right? If they just say, it was wonderful, but they don't know what was wonderful or why, that's a problem. So I'd like to share with you a couple of things. First, the context out of which we operate in a Jesuit school. And I know you have things like this in the LaSalle schools, because I remember seeing them when I was a student. So I know these things exist. But this is a 10-point plan for every teacher, every parent, every board member, every administrator knowing, well, what is it that makes a Jesuit school different from other schools? And you have to be able to explain this yourselves, that what you are doing with retreats and spiritual formation is part of what makes a school in LaSalle's tradition what it is, right? Somewhere, I know, somebody has written these things down. What makes a LaSalle school, right? It'll be in simple, pointed language like this, and you've got to pull it into the retreats, right? You've got to pull it into the retreats.
Probably for most of what we're operating right now, which would be, I think, akin to what he's talking about, is what we've identified as those 5 goals of Lasallian education. And that's being used as the basis of our Lasallian mission assessment process for our schools. So it's not as well put together in this booklet form like that, but we are moving in that direction. So again, I think that's sort of be thinking about that. If you're not familiar with it, I certainly can share with that later, as well as Ernest can too.
If you have these things with you, if we take a look at the freshman year. By the time a student is done freshman year, we say that they should be familiar with this phrase, finding God in all things, and it should be part of their experience as well. But it's not something that we do on a one-time basis. In May, when all students have received their letters and they've signed up and all this, we have an orientation, or pre-orientation really, where we get them all together while they're 8th graders, and we spend a day with them doing certain activities. And then at the very start, the very first day, we have them with their big brothers, that is seniors, who talk their first day through with them. And then at the end of the first month, we have what we call the Foundations retreat. One of the things that's really helpful when you're dealing with freshmen is getting the seniors involved. The seniors can be very influential in the life of freshmen, and the more the freshmen feel that they're tied in with those big kids, the better it will be for them. Now, at Georgetown Prep, we identify about 50 boys who operate as big brothers for the 120 or so freshmen that come in. At St. Joe's Prep in Philly, there's 200 seniors who volunteer to help with what they call their Ignite, Ignatius Night, Ignite. It's in both cases, we're talking about an overnight experience, and you can see that the things that they do are pretty simple. One, they've got to pack their bags, right? And it seems like such a silly thing, but if by the time they're juniors or seniors they can't pack a bag properly for a retreat, that's a problem. If you've got to get soap for seniors, if you've got to remind them that they have to bring their shoes on with them when they're seniors, that's a problem. So some of these things that are very simple, it's like these are part of what it means to go away together, right? Pack your bags, bring it to a particular place, register. They meet together with their big brothers, and then they do simple activities together in small groups and in large groups. When they're doing their Kairos reflections later on, small group conversations, large group conversations, if that's the very first time they've had a small group experience like that, there's going to be some boys and girls who can't speak out of their experience. It'll be too intimidating. So the simplest thing we do, we get a group of 10 guys, and they figure out who's the oldest and who's the youngest. And then they join with another group, and then they join with another group until they know who is the youngest kid in their class, who's the oldest kid in the class, where they all fit together. And then they try doing one of these modular exercises where they're lined up back to front, all the way around the circle, and they sit down on each other's laps and they try and walk a circuit. It's a simple activity that involves some skill and some ruckus, some fun, but they're able to identify cooperation with each other, that the guy I'm working with is actually a nice guy. I didn't know who he was. We can talk to each other. A talk about the so after that, then everybody's all wound up, right? And then we bring them in, we lay them flat, close their eyes, we do a little relaxation thing. So they've been doing a lot of horsing around and then relaxing and introducing that concept of silence to them, breathing techniques. And they'll come away from something like that thinking, oh, wow, that's wonderful. It's like all you did was lay down and close your eyes. But the way in which they need to cooperate with each other for that works. Then we lead them through the history of the school. Somebody talks to them about what it means to be a member of this particular community. After that, they do a trust walk where they're lined up in a group and blindfolds on, they're holding each other's shoulders like they're following the elephant in front of them, and they get led in a certain trust pattern. All of these things they should be able to talk about. First, we did this big group activity together where we did this, and then we relaxed, and then we did a trust. So they can put it into language that they're conversant with, and they know what the point is. And as you're getting them through this, they understand this as well. A mass in the chapel where there's an anointing of each group. They get a sense of the sacred and so forth. Snacks, gym time, running around. A retreat like this can be organized in so many different ways. If you've got a big game that you want all the freshmen to be at, you incorporate that into what's going on. That's part of kind of understanding the context of where the school is at. But at the very start of the year, you're just trying to get them conversant with each other. It seems like so much common sense, but to be able to articulate it, right, for it to be coherent, that you can explain to teachers if you want them on board we'd like you to do this. And then they know what's expected of them, right? So everybody knows what they're supposed to do. A retreat like this, very, very simple to run, you know. But then you can't just let this go, right? This can only be a piece of it. Students will get together again in December for like a day of recollection. We use the December 8th because there's a liturgy that day. And after the liturgy, they go to class and then they go to lunch, and it's a lunch just for freshmen. And at that time, they talk about, you know, the big brothers are there, faculty are there, identifying who has been most supportive to you in your first 3 months. Where have you really been challenged? Where are you really finding difficulty, right? So you give them a chance to talk out these things, and they'll be a little bit more trusting. Sitting down, there's no huge activities with games or anything, just a chance for them to sit at lunch with each other and talk through these things. So that's halfway through the year in December.
How big of a group are we talking about?
Well, it depends on the nature of your school. With 120 students, we had 3 lunch periods, so it was 40 people in each lunch period. But I made sure that if we had 8 freshmen at a table, I would make sure I had a senior at the table and a faculty member at the table. And I should have, but I didn't bring the interview that they work out. But the senior leads it, right? And the faculty is there just to make sure that they stay on task and that the kids don't erupt. But to try and work through in this luncheon where it is that they get the most support and where it is that they need support. Getting them together again in January when they get back from Christmas vacation. Some kind of activity. Sometimes we've used a film, sometimes we've used a speaker with pizza for them all to get together at night. And again, just to talk about their experience. And it does not have to be deep. You're just getting them used to the idea of sitting with each other and talking to each other about their particular experience. We end the year with this that helps them review what they've accomplished. We call this retreat Quo Vadis. Where are you going, Lord? Where am I going? And we take them up to the Appalachian Trail. And it's over the course of 3 days. So again, we break them into 3 groups, 40 students each time. We break those 40 students into, 5 or 6 or 7 smaller groups. And we set off on a hike on the trail where we go from the lowest point to the highest point on the trail. When we get to the highest point, we have lunch together. And then we walk back down for a barbecue after that. But along the way, we stop and it's basically Mass in procession. We start with the blessing at the head of the trail, do a little reflection. Stop, do a reading, do a reflection. Stop, do a reading, do a reflection. Go up, have lunch together, come back, stop, do some intercessions, come back to another point, stop, do the Eucharistic prayer, share communion, have dinner together, and then the final blessing. Along the way, each of the readings we use centers them a little bit, and the questions that are there for their journal, that's just to get them writing in a journal. This is a new piece. This is something they don't do when they first start. There's no writing involved. But sooner or later, when they're juniors or seniors on the retreat, keeping those journals is going to be important. So that they write whatever freshmen write, but it gets them in the habit of stopping, thinking, writing, then talking about what they're writing. So it's not a big surprise to them later on when they do this. Walking with each other, getting a sense that they're all part of something bigger. when they can look back over the trail as they look back over their year. We give them a compass at the start. We talk about the meaning of the compass. I show them how to read the signs on the trail. We use the Appalachian Trail because it's blazed really well. And so we talk about the markers along the way. They have to take turns being the leaders. So all these things that you're kind of modeling for them on a very simple retreat will kind of help them later on with other things that we're doing. During the course of any particular year, different aspects of these things can change, right? You don't want to be married to any one particular thing because, let's say you're organizing that first month retreat around a soccer game or a football game, and then it rains and the game is canceled. Well, you've got to have another plan. You've got to have rain plans. If you're going out on the Appalachian Trail and it's a storm, what are you going to do? You've got to have. If somebody falls and hurts themselves, what are you going to do? There's got to be contingencies. If somebody has particular dietary needs, if somebody gets a bee sting, you've got to have plans for all of this that everybody understands. But during the course of this first year, you zero in again and again, finding God in all things. Now, I said before that this is consonant with what's going on in the classroom, right? So the first month of their religion classes, they're talking about Ignatius and his history and things like this. Well, in your first year, by the time they're done their first month, and I'm sure this is probably true, students know who Jean-Baptiste was. And you build like little blocks. You build on that over the course of a year. Nothing too big. As I said, we just take this one thing, finding God in all things. And every chance we get, we're looking at that again and again and again. And that zeroes in, like I said, with the document, what makes a Jesuit school Jesuit, the graduate at graduation, so that when these students go home, they can talk to their parents, they can talk to the other teachers, and the teachers and the parents are going to talk to board members about their experience. So everybody has the same idea of what's going on in their freshman year. It's not over. We keep it very simple, finding God in all things. We say that what they should be able to do at the end of the retreat, they should, through written reflection, be able to articulate their experience, and they should, through some kind of being in class together, talking about it, when they get back, their religion teacher says to them, "How was your retreat?" They can talk about the different things that they did. They can articulate it, and it's coherent. In this freshman thing, I pointed out how there's a certain part of the catechism that we zero in on, who is God, right? And then looking at the spiritual exercises at the beginning, the principle and foundation. Well, what is it within your own documents that's the first core value? Speaking earlier about those 5 things, right? Well, one of them must be first, right? So you start with whatever's first and zero in on that. When we go to sophomore year, it's a bigger challenge. They've got more energy. They're not afraid. They're even more foolish than they were as freshmen. But they've got a sense of what's going on. In sophomore year, depending on where your Kairos retreat is, or whatever your capstone retreat is, in your sophomore year, you're trying to transition them from the very simple to the activities that are going to become more complex. And what did I do with these? I had some time to fold some, but not all. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And just send it down that way.
Do you want me to do that now, or are you talking?
Sure, that would be great. I think you'll need 7 down there.
This is 5 pages.
Yeah, it's about 5 pages.
We need one for Alan, too.
At the end of the Kairos retreat, the students are challenged with 2 key concepts, which is challenging for every Jesuit in formation as well. It's something we call the contemplatio, or the contemplation of love in action. We ask ourselves whether we can love the way God loves. And if this were possible, what would we be doing? And this is the same whether you're talking about a junior student or a senior student or a fully formed priest, right? Can I love the way that God loves? If this is possible, what would I be doing? Ignatius says there are 2 things that we would want to accomplish. First, that love consists of deeds rather than words. Now, this is something which a junior, senior, or a senior student can get. It's not enough just to talk about it. You have to be able to live it. And this is where they also are able to deal with the concept of failure. Right? It's very important because kids constantly fail and they hate to deal with it. But contemplating love puts a positive spin even on failure. So, one, how do I live a life that is deeds rather than words? The second point Ignatius says is that love consists in sharing everything I have with the one that I love. When students get this, you see a transformation taking place in their class. They start caring about each other, showing up for each other's activities, inquiring about the health of their parents or their siblings, making sure that freshmen are getting rides to where they need to go. You see a senior class that is energized, so much so that when you sit down with the freshmen in their retreats and you say to them, what have you noticed about the seniors that's different from the way you are yourselves? They can give you very specific examples of what the seniors are doing. So it's at the very end of that Kairos retreat, again, whether it's junior or senior year, where they talk about putting love into action, right? Deeds rather than words, and sharing everything you've got with the ones that you love. Now, the sophomore retreat then is going to be right in between this finding God in all things and being able to love the way God loves. That's a big step, right? So we call this sophomore retreat the threshold retreat because they're stepping over a particular threshold. And you'll also notice that as we go from year to year, the manuals get a little bit more meaty. But we also, because this is overnight and a very active kind of retreat, we also want to be sure that people understand precisely what's going on at every single stage. So you'll notice in the way this is broken down, and again, I recommend something like this for when you're working on a sophomore retreat. All right, that everybody understands their responsibilities, that everybody knows what they're bringing, everybody knows the schedule, that there are particular presentations, there's particular activities, and every single one of them is explained, right? If you turn to let's see, let me find a good. Well, if we go to the presentations, there. All right, we begin by explaining to the students why they are there. We give examples of a threshold. We show them what it means by crossing a threshold, and we introduce a concept for them that's really critical that we call challenge by choice. And it's going to be used not just in their verbal communications with each other, but it's going to be used in their physical activities with each other. The idea of challenge by choice is very important because when they get to be a junior or a senior and they're sitting there in their capstone retreat, again, whatever that capstone retreat is, when they're sitting there and they're trying to communicate something very personal to somebody else, they know that they don't have to speak if they don't want to, but they can speak if they want to. So they've got that concept already built in. The first part of this retreat is going to be some ice-breaking activities, some conversations, some physical activities. That first night, they stay overnight with each other. The next day, we take them out onto a ropes course where they do all sorts of physical things with each other, but we've talked it all out with them the night before, so that when they go into it physically, they have in their heads what it is they're supposed to be doing. So again, each activity there's an objective noted, all right, what everything is, each thing that is supposed to happen. We concentrate on these things with them: their personal potential, their class potential, communication as a function of family, communication as a function of service, and the challenge of freedom. These are areas where, in their own growth, putting love into action is going to be challenged the most, right? I can't get myself to do it. I can't get my class to do it. I don't know how to deal with my family. I don't know how to deal with the world. And the concept of freedom. I am free to do all these things, right? But the real challenge comes internally. But they're all, again, based on that concept of reaching toward the idea of loving the way God loves by making my actions real and sharing who I am or what I have with others. This particular retreat can be a lot of fun, but any retreat that you design, again, you should be able to coherently explain. Let me take as an example an icebreaker that we use. If you flip just past the center to the shoe race. This happens not long after they first get there, and there's about 40 students broken into 3 groups, and each group will have 12 or 13 students. They're in a big room, a start line on one side of the room, a finish line on the other side. There's 1 pair of shoes with each group. All right? They have to figure out how to get everyone in their group from one line to the other line. Each person can only wear the shoes once in one direction, and they've got to get everybody across. This means everybody has to be talking with one another. Nobody can be hanging back. Everybody's got to participate because they can't win unless everybody goes. So everybody's got to be included. So the very first icebreaker activity is one in which everybody has to share everything they have or what they got with the other folks that are going too. It's also the first time where you're going to take a look at them and see who is going to be a maniac the next day on the ropes course. So you can identify behaviors. So your retreat team is kind of learning from the get-go what's going on. How are people going to interact and cooperate with each other? You've got the seniors who've come along and the juniors have come along. This is a chance for you to have senior leaders and junior leaders to bring them along to act as referees and judges and team leaders and stuff like this. So they're in these 3 groups. They get everybody across. Everybody wins, right? Everybody wins. We break them up shortly after that into smaller groups. We have notebooks. So instead of this the freshman journal where they're just writing a few sentences, they get a notebook in their sophomore retreat, and they're writing a little bit more, right? We break them up into 5 groups. And again, random in the sense that we hand out the notebooks. The notebooks are different colors, 5 different colors, and they break into those groups. And we keep breaking them into different groups over the course of the retreat so that whether they're in groups of 3, whether they're in groups of 8, whether groups of 10, or whether it's the whole group, they're seeing or witnessing each other in all different contexts, and they're constantly mixing up with each other. On the freshman retreat, they were walking with each other in one group, and they were working with that one group. Now there's much more interaction. By the time they get to their capstone retreat, whatever that is, they should be capable of sitting down with or working with any one of their classmates. We have certain trust activities. And by the way, too, this is a retreat where you really have to work hard at training your student leaders for the retreat. You know you've got student leaders for your capstone retreat. This is a good chance for you to exercise those student leaders and say, who's good at this? And when you identify them, you say, oh, I can take him, I won't be taking him back. But it's an experience for them to see how well they can filter some of these ideas too. So simple activities like a trust walk, but not like there's 8 of them in a row going like elephants. This is one-on-one trust walk activity where one sophomore leads another sophomore. And so we learned from experience on this, right? At first it was just, we had 4 different exits, everybody goes outdoors, we ring a bell, they all come back. You find some problems, like the guy who thinks it would be funny to lead another guy into a tree, you know? That happened once, and that's all it took me to learn, because those 2 guys didn't talk to each other for a year and a half. So what do? We got little cones, light cones. They had to follow a pattern, right? So again, whatever activity you're using, you've got a particular goal in mind. You can explain what you're doing to them, and it coheres with the retreat as well. So they've got their partner trust walk, and then we have another trust activity where there's a group of 8 or so guys. One of them falls down, they lift them up, and they lower them, right? But it's the group working together in trust. And again, all these things you have to take time practicing with one another. There's another trust exercise that takes place after that. We get, jerseys, these these baseball jerseys, blank on the front and the back, and we use the word magis, a Latin term that means that which is better, or that which is good. And they go to their partner and they write the word magis across their chest, and then they go behind their back and they write that which is most valuable about that person. And then they go around with each other, and it's one of the most enjoyable activities for them to write all the cool things or all the great things. And this reinforces that concept from the freshman retreat, right? Finding God in all things. What do you find great about this guy? What does this guy do better? Where do you find yourself really lifted up? And they're not allowed to look, so they're wearing these things for about 2 hours. Before they can take them off and look at them. So they're really itching to know what it is that's going on behind their back. But it's another trust activity, right? So you kind of build trust, and so that the next day, when they're 40 feet in the air and somebody's using a belaying line on them, well, if everything has worked out well the night before, they're ready for that. They're ready for that. And then if that soaks in with them over the course of the summer and they come back as juniors and then they're ready for their capstone retreat, they processed all of this. They've talked about it with each other. One of the things that we like to do as an activity with them, the final activity before Mass on that overnight, we And this takes some organization during the whole year, right? But from the time they enter as freshmen, we're taking pictures of them. All through freshman year, all through sophomore year, all through junior year, all through senior year. So at the end of their sophomore retreat, from the time of their first freshman retreat, we've got pictures of them together and singly, and we run like a 10-minute slideshow that they can see their progress from last year to this year, where it's visible to them. And we always make sure, like we take pictures of the ropes course of the group before, and we get it in there, right? We get it in there, and even if they're they're doing their jersey decoration or they're doing their shoe race, whatever it is, we're taking pictures all the time. We're getting those pictures right in there. So when they see that slideshow that night, they're seeing themselves 6 hours earlier. And they're like, whoa, I did that. So there's a visual way of getting them to understand that they're part of something bigger, that they're sharing who they are, that they're seeing their deeds come to life, that everything that we're talking about is right on the screen for them. And then, then we go down to the liturgy. And at the liturgy, we focus on the concept of light and salt. We take that simile from Matthew's Gospel, what good is salt if it loses its flavor? And we pass around a bowl of salt and everybody tastes the salt, right? We pass around candles and they start, the room is just dark at the start except for one candle on the altar. And then they light one by one, and they, with 40 candles is a lot of candles, So it really lights up the room. And these things are clicking in their head. They're simple things, right? But they click in their head, and it really makes sense to them. Essential in the sophomore retreat, getting them to bed on time, so that when they're juniors and seniors, they know the value of getting to sleep as a preparation for the activity the next day. If this isn't built into their retreat, they don't value the silence, they don't value the sleep, and they end up with all sorts of hijinks that are going to cause trouble for you as a director and are going to cause trouble for them as somebody able to take in those things there. In terms of prelection for this, again, we go back to the catechism, we go back to the spiritual exercises, and we kind of identify what it is that they're doing. Now, these things that they're doing in this retreat should not be segregated from what they're doing in their service programs. Whoever your service director is, it may be you, there should be some integration between what you're trying to accomplish on the retreat and what you're trying to accomplish in the service program, and some reflection of this in the classroom as well. That when they're back in the classroom, they're not doing something that's totally devoid of content in terms of what's going on here. Does that make sense? I think I'll stop there for a minute and see if there's any questions.
2 nights, 1 night?
This is one overnight. So they arrive around 4 or 5 in the afternoon, and then they finish up by 1:30, and they're able to be back at school and pick up the next group that's coming. So we run it on 3 successive days. We also run the sophomore retreat at the end of the 3rd quarter. And that's another thing that's very important. Use of time is really important in a school. And every faculty member will tell you, and you know this yourself, that there's never enough time to do in your classroom what you need to do. And if you're constantly being disrupted by a retreat, then people aren't going to appreciate the retreats very much. But if you build what's going on in the retreat into the natural rhythm of the school, you'll find that teachers are much more accepting of it, and there will be fewer complaints to administrators. So we put this at the end of the 3rd quarter, just before the spring break. So sophomore faculty know that it's coming. They've got this extra time at the end to get their grades done before they're due, and then there's a break for everybody afterwards. So that's that other thing. We're kind of working through the natural rhythms of the school as a context. But again, when they're done this, and if they get these concepts of God in all things, love and action, if they've got these concepts, then when they go to whether they're doing an Amos retreat or a Kairos retreat or a serendipity retreat or whatever, a search retreat, whatever kind of retreat it is you use as a capstone, they've got certain essential retreat skills that they've mastered. Or if they haven't mastered them, at least they know what they're supposed to be doing, right? And as far as getting them to reflect on the things that are essential to mission, you're also giving them that language or that vocabulary that they can use in the course of their own reflections with one another, with their teachers, and with administrators. Find a way to include your administrators somewhere. For the sophomore retreat, we make sure the administrators are there at the end of the retreat to receive them back. You know, that they come into the chapel and they say hello and they feel like they're part of it, and they're patting them on the back, and great things. Are there any questions in terms of what we've been working on? Yeah.
I have a general question. One of the things I've observed, it seems like from at least the freshman and the sophomore retreats that you do, that there's a sense of kind of either a change of location or sort of a change of, that this is different and apart from what it is that we do every day. As much as it's part of the curriculum, it's definitely sort of it is a retreat in the sort of physical sense of the word.
You step away.
Can you talk a little bit about the importance of doing that and sort of the constraints? The school that I work at, it's a big school, 1,400 students.
Yeah.
Day retreats are required. So how do you do that with a freshman class of 400 plus or 300 plus?
One of the things that you don't want to do with students is time. Because if the first thing that they learn is that a retreat is a waste of time, they will hate every retreat in sequence. So they have to be convinced from the very start that what they're doing is worth their time. And the administrators also have to know that you're using their time well. If the retreatants come back and they're all riled up about what they've done, and you know the headmaster or the principal or the president can go into their board and talk about this rally point, then they'll do whatever they need to do to make sure this happens, right? So getting them off campus is important, but this is a matter of convincing your administrators that they've got to invest in the resources in order to do this. And resources are going to be limited, right? I said at the start, you're going to be competing with other activities, and that's why you've got to make sure that you sell this as a co-curricular activity and not an extracurricular activity. When I got to Georgetown Prep, they were charging for every retreat except for the capstone retreat. You had to pay a certain fee. And I said, no way. I'm not going to sit around collecting $20, $30, $50. You spend all your time doing that, right? If your school is advertising itself to the public as of a particular nature, and they're paying however many thousands of dollars they are, surely $50 or $100 can be sequenced into a particular activity. That's why I said these reports are so important. You break it down where they look at this and they say, oh, for the freshmen, it cost $40 a piece to run this retreat, $48 to run this retreat. That's not so bad. when they're a senior, you know, okay, over the course of time, in their total 4 years, we've spent $656 on each student so that they could get a certain amount of retreats done. Well, that's less than most every other activity they've participated in, right? It's cheaper than any sports activity, right? And so the board members look at that and they say, oh yeah, this is not too bad. This is a good investment, especially if they're getting back those good reports. So it's not going to happen overnight, but you've got to kind of arrange things progressively, and it means sometimes that you can't do all of your retreats all at once. So when I got to well, at each of the schools I got to, we weren't rolling out all 4 retreats simultaneously. We were working on the one retreat, making sure we got it right, promoting it, and then adding in the next retreat, and then adding in the next retreat. Nothing succeeds like success, you know. And also very important, if something goes wrong, address it immediately. Don't cover it up. Don't hide it. Don't paper it over. Address it immediately. That's what we added that Good Shepherd, as I talked about, the one part, problem solved. You know, address it immediately. Are there other questions?
We can continue, just listening in the back here, we can continue at dinner. Brother Richard will be able to stay with us for dinner, so informal conversation can continue as you so desire. So if it's okay with you, why don't we pause here and retire to dinner, and you all will reconvene here at 7:15. And Brian is going to help facilitate the roundtable.